Hello and welcome to the Bituation Room podcast live stream on Election Day, November 4th, 2025. This is a pre-recorded episode. However, I want to tell y'all to get out there and vote. We will be doing a Thursday show sort of running down the election results, but obviously, big day for New York City. Let's go, Zoran. Let's effing go. Come on, baby. I hope he wears his apron with nips out for the day and he votes that way. I'm very excited to plan Cuomo's move to Florida. But you cannot get complacent. Everybody voting is late. You can still do phone banking if you want to phone bank. Also, Katie Wilson, mayor of Seattle, next mayor of Seattle, we hope. Let's knock Bruce Harrell out of this thing. Of course, Katie was with us during the live show over the summer over in Seattle. So that was such a good time. And I'm a big believer. Also, of course, in California, Prop 50. Let's go. You know how California does by mail. If you haven't got your Prop 50 ballot in, you can still get it in today. Okay, so go send it in, go find a drop-off location, Prop 50, let's re-gerrymander this state so that we can actually mount some kind of offense or defense against what Republicans are doing across the country, gerrymandering all of the Democrats out. I mean, it's a wrap. Anyway, my name is Francesca Fiorentini. We have just an incredible show. It has been a long time coming, but I've really wanted to drill down on what the Trump regime's broadening of surveillance, use of the FBI against the left, against progressives, against organizers, against movements, against nonprofits, specifically Arab and Muslim organizers, Black and Brown organizers, anyone who, again, like trains organizers and has been like movement staples, foundations. They are going after it all. And a lot of this is in relationship to the NSPM 7, the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, who Ken Klippenstein is going to be joining us in a little bit to talk about that. Later on, we're going to speak with Professor of Law at CUNY University of New York, who co-directs an organization called CLEAR, Ramzi Kassem. You might know him because he's part of a legal team that has successfully, at least for now, defended people like Mahmoud, Khalil and Rümeysa Öztürk, who were detained for the crime of exercising their First Amendment right around Palestine. So very excited to have both of them on. If you're watching, like and share the stream right now. Send in some super chats. Maybe Francesca will jump in. Also watching live with y'all. If you're listening as a podcast, make sure to like and give this podcast 5 stars. And with that, let's do the damn thing. He is an amazing independent journalist. You can read his work at kenklippenstein.com. Klippenstein, let's get the real whether we like Stein or Steen from Ken himself. Please welcome Ken Klippenstein.
Hey,
Ken, how do we
Stein.
do this? Right. It's Stein. That's what I thought.
I think of it, it's like an ambidextrous thing. You can say however. I don't take any offense either way. Grew up in a bilingual family. If you can roughly approximate it, then that's good enough.
There we go. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, you've been doing like breathless coverage on not just this, but last time you were on, we talked about Venezuela and these, arguably illegal attacks on, boats in the Caribbean. But I really want to focus this show on this kind of pre-crime moment that we are living in under, Trump's and Stephen Miller's authoritarianism. We know that part of Project 2025 was to clamp down on progressives, leftists, nonprofits, any kind of street action. I mean, it's a hallmark of, autocrats and dictatorships and fascism. Then with the murder of Charlie Kirk about over a month ago, you really saw the agenda that seemed like it was already on its way, turbocharged. Talk to me about the NSPM 7. What are the kind of indicators they look for? They keep on calling things radical left violence when they are actually literally thoughts and identities. Why is NSPM 7 such a big deal?
So in one sentence, NSPM 7 authorizes the federal government to go after terrorism as defined by essentially the radical left. If you look at the indicators that this memorandum lists, and I encourage people to go on and actually look at it so they can see, I'm not sensationalizing, this is not Alex Jones, I'm quoting directly from the document. It identifies indicators of said terrorism as things like anti-Christianity, anti-government sentiment, anti-traditional family. I mean, it's got all these categories that
I've got it here because of your writing. You know, you're reporting anti-Christianity, as you said, extremism on migration, which you could imagine someone in a frog costume outside of a Portland detention facility would count. Extremism on race. So again, as you said, radical left, but it's really what is in the imagination of this regime's idea of what the radical left is.
Exactly. Yeah. When I first wrote the draft of that story, I had radical left at first, and it does include that. But as you say, it goes significantly beyond that. I mean, these categories are basically anyone who isn't MAGA.
Yeah. Or, look, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family. Well, we know what the right's view on family is. Obviously, it's a heterosexual couple. So if you're gay and in a marriage, you're a criminal. You could imagine a world where that could become the case. Or the hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on, right. Hostility towards those people. So it's like, if we criticize Christianity, we're being told that we're terrorists. If we criticize their morals, they say, hold traditional American views on morality. If we criticize that, or we have hostility towards it, we could be on a list. Talk to me about the operation. Like, how big of an FBI operation are we talking about?
So this is huge in scale. What it does is it authorizes what's called joint terrorism task forces. That's some 4,000 federal agents and local law enforcement deputized into the task forces, JTTFs for short, which exist in all 50 states. Most of this was established after and in response to 9/11. It tasks and authorizes them to respond to these forms of terrorism as defined by the indicators we were just talking about. And so what that does is it takes a step beyond what the admin had been doing with its National Guard deployments. When you watch video of those guardsmen, the reason you see these absurd images of them just picking up trash, I posted a PR clip that DOD put out, the Pentagon put out, kind of showing a guy kneeling over and picking up a piece of trash and like slow motion, showing the thing.
Is this the radical left?
Right. So this goes beyond that, because the reason they do all that is because they are restrained from engaging directly in law enforcement under posse comitatus. And so that's why it ends up being in large part a theater exercise.
Right.
But that's not the case with these JTTFs, because there is no posse comitatus for counterterror federal agents. They can directly go and do these things. And we've already seen arrests happening. I wrote about one case where someone was arrested, detained, interrogated while protesting outside of an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois. And he's not been charged with any crime. It's been a month since that happened, roughly. They haven't alleged any crime. That's one case that we know of.
Are you talking about Elias Cepeda or Cepeda?
Yes. Yeah.
So Elias Cepeda, he's a Chicago-based English professor. I've known him from the internet. Tell me about what happened.
Well, it's really extraordinary. He goes to these demonstrations and he documents the ICE and police presence. As you said, he's not some secretive person. I mean, you can go online and see what he says, see what he thinks. He works with, I think, some nonprofit group that documents the ICE activities there. And he was arrested, and the Department of Homeland Security put out a press release saying we've arrested this dangerous Antifa suspect, and he was armed, and they kind of tried to imply that he was going to do something. Well, it turns out he had concealed carry permit, and so he was armed, but he wasn't like brandishing at anyone. He wasn't doing anything illegal.
Sure.
I would guess
of course,
that a lot.
Historically, the left can never actually be armed. They can never exercise their Second Amendment rights. That much we've proven. But keep going.
Yeah, I'll take a wild guess that a lot of ICE federal agents believe in being publicly armed. But in any case, they arrested him, they interrogated him, they released him, no charges, and the post is still up, saying that he's this dangerous, and they list social media posts of his that would check a lot of the boxes that we were just describing as these predictors of future terrorism. What's interesting is after NSPM 7 is released, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, puts out her own directive citing NSPM 7 as its justification, saying you've got to worry, and it specifically mentions that Broadview ICE facility. Days later, Cepeda is arrested, and he's one of a bunch of cases of people that are arrested, not just where charges are not filed, but even the cases where charges are filed, juries end up not indicting, which is very rare. As I'm sure you know, the expression, it's, you can indict a ham sandwich, the idea being it is extremely easy for just the way the system is set up for a jury to say, okay, we're willing to indict this case and allow it to move forward. Their cases keep imploding, which gives you a sense of how slapdash they're being in what they're willing to pursue.
But then you have this case that you reported on of Miles Serafini in Tucson, Arizona, not someone who's kind of well known on Twitter or kind of out there, just a regular guy. And he's, as you write, 2 FBI agents showed him photos of himself at the protest when they approached him at his home. He said they knew so much about him. It was very scary. But they accused him of, organizing the demonstration or who organized it and whatnot. And it chilled him to the point where he decided to not participate in the most recent No Kings rally, because obviously this is a random kid or 26-year-old young guy, who was approached by the FBI. This kind of thing, I think, is where I'm sort of scratching my head. Like, you're going after very random people. And is it that chilling effect of like, we don't care if we can get an actual charge off this. There is, there's nothing here, but we just want people to stay in line.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And to the extent that NSPM 7 has been discussed at all in the major press, there tends to be a lot of these legal bigwigs that come on and say, oh, there's no such thing as a domestic terrorism statute, so they can't be prosecuted. That's narrowly true, but it's such a pedantic point, because that doesn't mean that you can't open an investigation and look at people and end up charging them with other crimes that you end up finding. It just means you can't charge them with that as a crime directly. The FBI has had for years a domestic terrorism section. So it's really misleading on the part of major media. There was a segment about this on, I think it was NBC recently, where they had an expert saying, oh, this is a big nothing burger because blah, blah, blah. Well, we just mentioned a couple cases where law enforcement is going to people, detaining them, questioning them, interrogating them. And in that case that you just mentioned now in Arizona, he ended up he said to me that he initially was interested in going to the No Kings protest, but after his experience was like, well, I'm kind of spooked. I don't know that I want to do that. He ended up not doing it. And that is the effect that we're already seeing something like this happening.
Yeah.
People not being able to talk about things. In the case of the congressional candidate in Illinois, she can't talk about this I assume at the advice of her lawyer, and that is exactly what they want. Is like,
we're
no one
talking
can
about
talk about
Abu
anything.
Ghazali.
Yeah, exactly. They know that once you start having this specter of law enforcement over them, people are going to be like, well, I better stop discussing things.
Yeah.
And it's not even wrong for them in some cases to do that if that's the advice of your lawyer, but that ends up having the knock-on effect of all of this stuff just happening in silence.
Right. And I think it's really, you've been doing great reporting, and I think you're right to point out that the media has been, just kind of missing in action. That might change, but it's also very scary because I've seen, and Ramzi and I are going to talk about it in a little bit, what are the legal strategies and how a lot of this is, a lot of the advice I just read from the ACLU is be louder, be more upfront about this, because the more sort of under wraps and flying under the radar that this goes, the easier it is to actually, throw the book at you or actually come up with some trumped up charge or keep on doing this. But I encourage everyone to go to kenklippenstein.com, I believe, and direct you to your Ken's Substack. The just excellent reporting from every single day, and just something you want to follow. So Ken, thank you for taking the time. I don't want to take up more of it. So and take good care on this election day.
Yeah, thanks so much for spotlighting this. I will say, as bad as the major media have been, the independent media has been fantastic. And ordinary people are so motivated to, learn about this and do something about it. In my experience, it's not a question of people not being interested and media like yourself not responding to it, because they absolutely have. It's just the media. It's just the major outlets that haven't paid enough attention.
Absolutely. All right, Ken, take care. Hope to see you soon. Thanks for making time, man. Before we bring in my next guest, I want to let you all know that that was obviously very, very harrowing and it's terrifying. And the idea that the FBI would come to your door, oh my God. What you need is a little bit of CBD. Very, very important during these trying times. Sunset Lake CBD will be there for you. And me, as I attempt to go to sleep. I do the thing where I get to sleep and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my God. And then I start thinking, well, I just have a little bite of my Goodnight Gummy, which has CBD, CBN, and a little bit of THC, just a little bit. And it really gets me back to sleep, calms the body, calms the mind. They have tinctures. They have coffee. They have salves for your aching muscles. I often do that because I have like repetitive strain injuries. So I put that on my wrists. I need some right now. Go to sunsetlakecbd.com. They're just such an incredible company. I also I just got a really, really lovely warm crew neck from them, that I can't find because I left it somewhere. Anyway, the point is, coupon code FRANTIFA. That is Frantifa for 20% off your order. Again, Frantifa, using that coupon code will hopefully not put you on a watch list. I'm going to roll right on to my next guest, who is a professor of law at the City University of New York, where he founded and co-directs CLEAR, which is a legal nonprofit and clinic, works with clients, communities, and movements nationwide and find themselves in the crosshairs of exactly what we're talking about. The security state, the the mission creep of the Trump administration. From 2022 to 2024, he served as senior policy advisor at the White House, and he's argued constitutional, criminal, and national cases before the Supreme Court, in the Federal Court of Appeals, district courts, military commission, Guantanamo Bay, and an immigration court. He's an elected member of the American Law Institute and a Freedom Scholar. And of course, you get the stand-up comedy intro. He is Ramzi Kassem. Please welcome Ramzi. Nice to see you.
Hey, friend. Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I want to, pick up where Ken left off, and sort of, some of the distinctions around, why label people as terrorists versus not, domestic terrorists versus foreign terrorists, and whether we should actually be scared. You and I spoke before this about how these are terrifying times. And while, we have to walk this line between being overreacting and being a little bit too afraid, not realizing we actually have some tools, and also being vigilant and staying on these issues. So give me your sense of that. How can Americans and how alarmist should we be about things like the NSPM7, things like, the attacking of colleges, nonprofits, and all the different movements we're going to talk about together?
Yeah, I mean, that's a key question. I think it's a really important starting point is to diagnose the current situation and the current problems accurately, so that we don't overreact and we don't underreact. And, the words you're using, I mean, I think vigilance, alertness, those are all really important concepts to keep in mind. Fear is something, you can't control. I mean, hopefully people are able to show courage and act despite their fear. But fear in a moment like this, where for a lot of people, these are events, these are actions by their government here in the United States that they're not accustomed to seeing maybe. And so naturally that's going to be frightening to many people and many communities, but hopefully it doesn't deter action, organizing, and pushing back in whatever ways are available to you in your lane and in your place. I think, but an accurate diagnosis is the starting point, because that determines where we allocate our resources and sort of the magnitude of the response. And you certainly don't want to overreact and waste resources and energy and cause undue alarm. You also don't want to underreact and get overtaken by the opposition.
Yeah, exactly. Obey in advance.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can talk about something Ken said, which was there's not really charges that are brought against a lot of these activists that are getting visited by the FBI. And, it is really just kind of chilling. But what, in terms of legal definitions of and categorizations of people as domestic terrorists versus like foreign terrorists, or some of the, people that you've represented, Mahmoud, Khalil included, Rümeysa, Öztürk, people who have been accused of, effectively under the Alien Enemies Act, working on behalf of some sort of foreign, terrorist organization, obviously, which is untrue. They are speaking up for the people of Palestine. Maybe you can just explain sort of those kinds of definitions and where it gets, scary and hairy. Scary and hairy.
Yeah, I mean, look, the interesting thing to keep in mind with cases like Mahmoud Khalil's and Rümeysa Öztürk, and this is true as well for like Mohsen Mahdawi, Yunsa Chung, Liqa Kordi, all of whom are my clients and our clients at Clear, is that the government hasn't even said, like they're not even claiming that any of my clients are effectively agents of some foreign organization. That is not at all the claim. Like explicitly, it is about their lawful speech. The government dusted off this like outdated mid-20th century law, and they're claiming that based specifically, explicitly on their lawful speech. So here, speech in defense of Palestinian lives and rights and in opposition to an ongoing genocide is what we're talking about. Speech that frankly should be celebrated and not punished, but that's what we're talking about. And this administration's position is that even though this is lawful speech, based on the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio's say-so, because they are non-citizens, they should be detained and deported. And thankfully, we've been able to disrupt that strategy to a degree because, Yunsa was never detained. Mahmoud, Mohsen, and Rümeysa are now out of detention, and we're working on getting Liqa out of detention. But that's one of the
Kordia, who has been held for 8 months now. Liqa, who's also she's Palestinian. She's a student. She was protesting at Columbia. Who's still detained.
That's right. And look, I mean the definitional stuff is important from a legal perspective, but I think when the president comes out with something like this memorandum, right, in PSM 7, talking about domestic terrorism. What that effectively does in practice is it sets up a permission structure for an entire sprawling national security apparatus that's been, built out and funded since 9/11. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about trillions of dollars at this point. So it's a permission structure for that apparatus to mobilize effectively against left organizing in this country, because of course Antifa as a single unitary organization does not exist. It's sort of like code on the right for really any organization that is pushing for a progressive agenda. And so what it does is it sets up this permission structure for these agencies, whether it's the FBI or the 53 joint terrorism task forces that dot the country, to start investigating. And I've talked and I've written about these sorts of investigations, like when the FBI shows up at your door to ask you questions about your political or religious beliefs. I mean, these are experiences that the clients' communities and movements that we've worked with at Clear, Muslim and or Black and or immigrant communities and clients have dealt with for years. But when that happens, I've thought about that and I've written about that as forms of subjudicial punishment, because it may not escalate mm-hmm. to charges in federal court, right? Like, so you may never see it through the formal system, but there's still a cost being imposed on people. There's still a chilling effect. Sometimes people are watch listed, right? Sometimes they're harassed at airports. They're denied boarding. All of these forms of subjudicial punishment don't go through a court. There's no due process. There's no transparency.
That's really important. I want to talk about Clear and go to all these different, groups that the Clear has defended and worked with, but specifically on, Palestine free speech. How have you been able to actually thwart the Marco Rubio agenda with Khalil and Öztürk? And also how, like, I know more recently, they're trying to re-detain Mahmoud. And so what, you guys have appealed, I believe. Just give me like an update on also like how you have ultimately been able to win.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say every day is a victory in the sense that like Mahmoud and Mohsen and Rümeysa are out. And the government wanted them to be detained. Yunsa was never detained, and the government wanted to detain her back in March. So every day since then is a victory in that sense. But the fight isn't over, right? I mean, as you pointed out, the government is still trying to re-detain and deport all of our clients. We're still fighting those cases, both in the like actual court system and federal courts. These are the cases that our clients brought that the government's trying to slow down. And in the administrative court, in the administrative system, the so-called immigration courts, which aren't really courts. Immigration judges aren't really judges. They're Justice Department employees that serve at the pleasure of the Attorney General and the President. They can be hired or fired at will. They're not independent. And this moment shows how much under the control of the White House these immigration judges and that whole administrative system can be. And so that fight isn't over. But I think the way we've gotten to this point and to the posture that we're in now with our clients out and speaking out, continuing to speak out, nobody does anything alone. I mean, it was a combination of the legal effort, a lot of organizing. When we walked out of court in that first court hearing in downtown Manhattan federal court in Mahmoud's case, there were thousands of people out there.
Of course.
So it was a combination of the mobilization, the media, and the legal effort that resulted, I think, in our clients being released. But as you said, the fight goes on. It's not over, and the government is still trying to detain and deport them.
Got it. And so, I mean, I'm not clear on like the legal strategy, but you guys were able to prove that there was no reason for the so-called infraction violation of organizing a demonstration that they should be detained.
Right. I mean, we were able to convince federal judges that there was no reason for them to be detained, that they didn't pose any kind of public safety risk, they didn't pose any kind of flight risk. Those are normally the things that courts look at to decide if somebody should remain in detention. And so we're able to get them out on bail that way, right? Judges agreed with us that these people pose no danger. Now, that wasn't an oversight on the government's part. It's not like the government made a mistake by choosing Mahmoud and Rümeysa. I think it was very much the point. They wanted to go for someone like Rümeysa, for example, who's a graduate student, a PhD candidate at Tufts. She's working on child development. She co-wrote a single op-ed in the Tufts Daily newspaper calling on the Tufts Senate to live up to its professed ideals in connection with, just divestment from the Israeli war machine, right? I think that was the sort of the crux of that op-ed. They go after her. That is a feature, not a flaw, right? Like they want to set a precedent that basically says, well, if we can do this to this person in particular, she's got no criminal priors, she's, like the sort of an ideal person in many ways. If we can do this to her, then we can do it to anyone. Like every subsequent case becomes easier. They want to establish that blueprint. And it starts with Palestine because, they astutely observed that that's a wedge issue in the American left, right? But then they
wonder where they got that idea,
right? And once they set that template, it's not going to end with Palestine. Then they can use that to suppress speech on reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, racial justice. Like that template is endlessly useful, and it degrades First Amendment protections, which they can also then use to criminalize people in the criminal legal system, and that would allow them to go after U.S. citizens as well. So it's no longer just non-citizens.
Right. And so that's incredibly important. A case like Rümeysa's too, because if that is literally speech. I mean, writing an op-ed. I mean, so
That's
is
right.
taking the streets as well.
That's
That
right.
is protected speech under the First Amendment. I guess
they're explicit about that. Like they have said time and again, this is about Mahmoud's role in student protests, like mediating and negotiating. This is about Yun Sa-chung showing up at a single protest at Barnard. This is about a single op-ed. Like they've been very explicit that it is about lawful speech, and their whole thing is we can do it based on lawful speech. And so any of us here in the United States, and frankly, I mean, this should be a universal or bipartisan issue. Anybody who cares about free speech in this country should be alarmed by this claim that based on the Secretary of State's say-so that your speech poses some kind of foreign policy problem that he doesn't even have to name, that they can detain you and deport you, and that the First Amendment is not a barrier to that. Because if the First Amendment is not a barrier to that, then they might start prosecuting people for their speech and their protected activity. And that eroded First Amendment protection that they eroded on the immigration side is not going to help you on the criminal side.
Right. And I want to play a little bit of this interview that Scott Bessent did what is he, the Treasury? I don't know why the Treasury Secretary is talking about this. I can assume it's to try to undermine any kind of funding for nonprofits and foundations and things like this. But this is Bessent saying openly that Charlie Kirk's murder, even though which was immediately pinned on the broader left and everybody on, left of John McCain, that this is their 9/11. And I want to get your reaction as someone who has worked with communities that have been specifically targeted in the wake of things like 9/11, like the Muslim American community. Even I myself as an anti-war activist, there are a lot of people who, the FBI's got a file on the raging grannies, who like are senior citizens that sing songs at demonstrations. But here we go.
I will tell you that Charlie's death is like a domestic 9/11, that we are going to find. It has alerted us to what Charlie knew, that these organizations are working within our borders. And look, we believe people have a right to free speech. They have a right to organize. They have a right to protest, but they have to do it peacefully. They cannot embrace violence, and we have seen it. We've seen it since the terrible day 2 years ago, the anti-Semitism and the bias that came out after October 7th.
So he names it right there, what we just talked about. Palestine is the pretext, but then we keep going.
2023, and many of these organizations have been financed by nonprofits, and it's going to stop. And we are going to, as they always say, follow the money. When you see these groups where all the signs match, they have hundreds of the same umbrellas that they're using. After they cause the mayhem, they have the same lasers that they're using to blind our police force.
Wait, I can't deal with any more of this. But my favorite part about, there's this argument that like all the demonstrators have the same sign, and it's like, yeah, man, I don't know. Talk to the Answer Coalition about the fact that their signs are all the same. But as someone who's like, yeah, the signs are kind of boring and they're all the same. But that's Scott Bessent saying, and specifically, we're going to go after the foundations and the nonprofits that, as you mentioned earlier, could mount any kind of, basically are progressive and could mount any kind of resistance to the current regime and the rollout that they are, the thugs they're releasing onto the streets, and on and on and on. The ways that they've already defunded so many nonprofits vis-a-vis defunding federal programs for a lot of these nonprofits that do such critical work. Give me a reaction to that, and him calling, the post Charlie Kirk moment another post 9/11 moment. Maybe specifically on the nonprofit side.
Yeah, I always find it curious when these people who are nowhere near New York on 9/11 talk about 9/11 and drape themselves in the flag. I was here. New York City is my home. I don't even know what he's talking about when he says a domestic 9/11. I'm pretty sure the original was a domestic 9/11. So anyway, like, all of that isn't even worth commentary, frankly. It's laughable. It's just sort of like this paper tiger. They have these imaginary boogeymen that, they're using their time and power to go after. With the nonprofits, I think it's part of a larger strategy, right? This administration, or, this edition of the Trump administration 2.0, they use the sort of interregnum of the Biden administration to prepare, for their return to power. And so, they're much more effective and organized and cohesive this time around than they were, back in 2016. And, the strategy seems to be to systematically attack any site of potential resistance or challenge to the Biden administration, to the Trump administration's policies and ideas. And so, whether that's the universities, where of course, universities in American history have been sites of contestation and challenge to power, whether it's the sort of nonprofit sector that supports an ecosystem of organizations, legal organizations, civil society organizations that might also challenge what this administration is trying to do, or whether it's the media in the different ways that we've seen, and attacks on the mainstream media on the one hand, sort of suing, CBS for like the rushes of their 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, all the way to like favoring certain corporate acquisition strategies that will concentrate, sort of create a chokehold on the flow of information in this country, at least through the mainstream media. I mean, all of these are part of a single, cohesive strategy to gradually try to choke out sites of contestation and challenge to the administration. The good news is that this administration has not been infallible. They have had their setbacks. They have had their losses in the sort of first year that they've been in power. And so a lot of this is very much still in play. And the strategy is transparent, and even the tools and tactics are not novel. In our work at Clear, we've worked with, again, clients, communities, and movements in the crosshairs of the U.S. security state for the better part of the last 2 decades. And that means we and those communities that we work with, that are mostly Black and or Muslim and or immigrant identified, have a lot of experience with these tactics. We already know that playbook. We know how to respond. And so I guess the counterpoint to the point I was making earlier, that, they have come into this moment much more prepared than they were in 2016. I think there's a version of that that's true for lack of a better term, the American left. I think the American left is also, like the ecosystem of civil society groups and other organizations, is also better prepared than it was in 2016.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially because, we can go back to, obviously like COINTELPRO, or we can go back to Japanese internment. There's ways to go farther and farther back in American history. But yes, in the last, 24 years or whatnot, since 9/11, and even the creation of DHS as a thing, it seems like, things have not, even from Democrats, there has not been the political ability to unwind and undo the amount of surveillance that, the post 9/11 era gave rise to. I just want to mention that it's very funny. Like, I just keep on making this connection because Scott Bessent used to work for George Soros. And of course, George Soros is the billionaire boogeyman for the right because he happens to like not be the shitty billionaire. He donates to like very good causes, and he's through the Open Society Foundation. And so it's funny because Scott used to work with Soros when it was like came to investing, and then now he's going to go after like the Open Society Foundation. Just a fun little thing. He should probably investigate himself under that, rubric. I want to take it for parts too, because, we talked about, people speaking out around Palestine, but there was a recent AP article about now the DOJ looking into Black Lives Matter leaders and organizations, subpoenaing multiple people and serving at least one search warrant, looking into the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Like what is the impact of this? And there are no criminal charges right now, but they're talking about like, oh, maybe you misspent funds and things like that. And I remember, this has been a discussion within the BLM movement around where the funds, went and whatnot. But like the idea that rises to any kind of crime or, civil violation, whatever, is absolutely insane. And it also, this feels like just kind of one big backlash, just like Trump is a massive backlash to everything. The civil rights movement is like a backlash to what happened in 2020. But give me your read on this and what you can tell us.
Yeah, and Fran, like actually the just as there was talk, because you were mentioning earlier that there was talk within sort of BLM circles about what had happened with some of the funds. The right was obsessed with this going back to 2020, and so a lot of the nonprofits and think tanks on the right, whose job it is to mark targets now for the Republicans, whether it's for like congressional investigations or the sorts of more kinetic, more aggressive actions that we're seeing here with like subpoenas and search warrants and grand juries and federal prosecutions potentially. No charges have been filed yet. Like that's what that was all about. You have these think tanks that will paint targets, mark targets. Then, once Trump comes back into power and his people are installed, they start to look into them, and they start to sort of, follow up on these obsessions and fantasies that they've had for many years about BLM specifically. In the interest of disclosure, Clear has long worked with a lot of progressive movements in this country, whether it's the anti-war movement or the movement for the Black-led movement for racial justice, long before 2020 even. We're currently advising some folks who are concerned about what was just reported, for example, last night in the Associated Press story about BLM Global Foundation. This might be an illustration of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like where you have, you're now in this investigative stage where you have, FBI fanning out, you have grand jury subpoenas, and that alone is going to have a ripple effect. It's going to have a chilling effect on people in those networks, and it's going to send a message. If you have that sort of confirmation bias where you're on the right and you already believe that BLM was corrupt, then this will confirm that for you, even though no charges have been brought or proven. The thing to keep in mind about what was just reported in the Associated Press about BLM is that they are, according to that article, the folks that have been approached by federal law enforcement from within the sort of BLM Global Foundation network are subjects and not targets of investigation, and that legally there's a distinction there. If you're a subject, that means the FBI is kind of on the fence, like they haven't decided whether they're going to go after you, like whether you're a target and you're going to be charged, or whether you're more of a witness, right, which is a safer bucket to be in. You're kind of in the middle, and that's what that sounds like. It sounds like right now, at least, they're looking at these folks, at least according to this article, as subjects, but that could go either way. That means it could either go away or they could turn into targets.
I mean, and interestingly, I would say, I would argue, right, officially or unofficially, but like even by asking to be a witness or compelling someone, it is kind of like you're being a target anyway. You're being asked to kind of undermine this broader movement. And I do think, this is just something like, this is very COINTELPRO. It's like more legalese COINTELPRO, above the surface COINTELPRO, because it's like, playing on divisions that might exist or questions, and like, sort of like undermining, movements in that direction. And I mean, they do this anyway, through provocateurs and people who infiltrate, everything from Occupy to Black Lives Matter had, I think back in 2015, there was like some report about the number of infiltrators of FBI agents working to undermine these organizations. I guess, even something like your work, even the legal work to protect people, I'm assuming will try to be targeted. Like, you lawyers need lawyers who need lawyers. But yeah, that's...
Yeah, look, it's so 2 points on that, friend. It's part of a long tradition in this country, multi-generational tradition of successive administrations of various political hues going after Black-led organizing for racial and social justice. You mentioned COINTELPRO. That's a classic example. But if we look more recently, 2020 post George Floyd, Trump won. The first Trump administration, the Attorney General at the time, Bill Barr, literally sicked the nationwide network of 52, 53 joint terrorism task forces against, Black-led racial justice organizers and organizations in an effort to disrupt that movement, right, which was in full swing at that point in the summer of 2020. And so, I think you're absolutely right that this is an iteration of that. The point here with this is to send a message throughout, because of course, just like the universities and the press and the nonprofit sector, Black grassroots organizing was always going to be seen as a threat to this administration. And so, of course, they're going to want to go after that perceived threat as well, and try to disrupt that ever important, crucially important in this moment form of organizing.
I have like two more questions for you. The one that I think it's on a lot of our minds that this is the same, regime that freed 1,600 people who were charged and were convicted of crimes that they committed on January 6th, 2021. And we are also in a time when, like, maybe some of those same people, or maybe people who are in militias, or maybe people who are on domestic, extremist watch lists themselves in the FBI, who of course now are no longer being watched, are joining ICE and are doing things like, the very ethnic cleansing that they dream about online, in real time, on the backs of immigrants. And it was just like the terrifying also like hypocrisy that we live in of like actual convicted criminals being let go politically motivated versus like speech of op-eds, or you shared a meme about Luigi, like that, which we haven't quite gotten there yet. But someone who does a Luigi Mangione podcast, for example, I know was visited by the FBI. So things like that. I don't know. That's just me sort of like this is a very bizarre moment to be doing the work that you're doing, because we live in the upside down right now.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's like, there was a very public, I mean, it was televised sort of congressional attack on me and my work, my organization, Clear. They've been having these anti-Semitism hearings in the House Committee on Education and Workforce, and the Republicans on that committee questioned the head of my university about when he was going to terminate me and when he was going to shut down Clear. And, that's just one example, right? I mean, they've been doing this because this was like the 8th hearing, right? So they've been doing this with a lot of different universities in different ways. So it is a bit of an odd moment, but I keep on thinking that as much as it's a moment of, possibility for the right, the flip side to that coin is that it's also a moment of possibility for the left. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that in different ways, right? Like people are not being silenced. People are coming out. If the aim of sort of detaining someone like Mahmoud Khalil was to silence the pro-Palestine movement, then that's completely backfired, because thousands of people, as I mentioned earlier, came out for his first court hearing. I can't count the number of people who've come up to me and were like, we knew nothing about Palestine before your clients were detained, but that's what got us to like learn about this, and we're outraged.
Wow.
So I feel like it's backfiring in all sorts of ways, like big and small. And then we're even seeing it electorally, right? I mean, you have campaigns all over the country. I mean, here in New York, obviously, Zahran Mamdani's mayoral run, but there are examples of this all over the country where people are like, you know what, we can actually reinvent even electoral politics. And we're seeing different species of like left populism pop up throughout the country. So I don't know if that's going to take root. I don't know how far that will spread. But it just at least indicates that it's not just a moment of like openness and possibility for the right. It's also the same for the left, and we have some agency in that.
I love that. I have like one last question, even though that was really hopeful and I appreciate it. But just talking about Antifa, again, Trump's been obsessed with it. Stephen Miller's obsessed with it. It is not an organization, as we mentioned. It's loosely affiliated street activists. Obviously Antifa stands for anti-fascist. I think many millions and millions of people identify as anti-fascist. They were recently designated as a domestic terrorist organization. What does that mean? Have there been other groups that have been, what are the other groups that have been labeled a domestic terrorist organization? And where would they like to designate them a foreign terrorist organization, as they, we spoke before about, how as they've designated like cartels, which enables them to do these targeted strikes, like, we're fighting ISIS or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's another odd thing about this particular obsession with Antifa, because I mean, if memory serves, I thought the U.S. government was like one of the original Antifa in terms of, World War II, or at least that's the lore. Mm-hmm. But like the designation or sort of all this talk about a domestic foreign terrorist organization, on the one hand, legally, right, in a very narrow legal way, it's not particularly significant. It doesn't particularly have teeth the way that like a designated foreign terrorist organization like sort of sets into motion a whole bunch of very scary things and mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, like, for the president, the White House, other agencies, other officials, to talk about Antifa as like a domestic terror organization, even though it isn't a single organization, that is still quite dangerous because, you know, that's sort of like code on the right for, you know, a nebulous network of like progressive causes and organizations, right? And so the fact that it's being addressed at a very senior level gives permission to everybody down the chain of command, FBI agents, Homeland Security investigations agents, and others, to sort of go after folks and organizations that they may perceive as quote unquote Antifa. And so you have these, again, like subjudicial forms of punishment in the form of like investigation, you know, all of that permission structure that like the fact that somebody super senior like the president has addressed it and named it as a problem, you know, domestic terror, Antifa this, Antifa that, that gives permission to everybody down the chain of command to act on, right?
Yeah.
To investigate. And maybe they'll dig up something else that is actually punishable by law. But they wouldn't have scrutinized that person or that organization were it not for the fact that they had been mislabeled in this way as quote unquote
mortgage fraud. Anyone seems to be the latest thing is do all the mortgage fraud that
and it could be anything. It could be mortgage fraud, it could be tax stuff. Like, I mean, those will be the most likely attack vectors. And then, you know, of course, if the next shoe drops and the administration, you know, designates Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization, I mean, again, it doesn't exist here. It doesn't exist overseas either as a single organization. But if there is that designation, then a whole bunch of other legal mechanisms and security mechanisms kick into play that could be problematic, mostly overseas, but to some degree domestically as well, like in cases of like what we've seen over the last 20 years, you know, where people are accused of like material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization and have served, you know, 20 plus years in federal prisons because of that. And sometimes that material support, I mean, if you look at the Tariq Mahanna case out of Boston, the material support in question was that he translated materials, sort of like literature from Arabic into English. And that was considered to be material support for a foreign terrorist organization. And he spent a very long sentence in federal prison because of that. So that, you know, if they cross that Rubicon, then we'd be having a different conversation. But I don't know that they will, because I think a lot of this is just about the communication, like the splash of saying, you know, we're designating them as domestic terrorists, knowing full well that there will be like practical consequences to that by way of investigation and harassment.
And even more so, you know, this sort of like, again, just the number of actual, let's be real, the right-wing violence, the murder of, Minnesota state representatives, and the attacks on like whatever, Paul Pelosi, like there's real right-wing violence. And so it's a little bit of like again, kind of a permission structure also to the psychos out there who are like, well, I guess this person is a terrorist. I'm justified in doing whatever I want to them. I could hunt them. I could stalk them. I could, we know I can't remember where, but that 2 young women were killed by a car because a kid didn't like a joke they made about Charlie Kirk. I mean, again, this is whatever. It is linked in that it's sort of the fish rots from the head down. Ramzi Kassem,
no, I think that's fair.
Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time. It is election day. We are pre-recording this, but it is election day. Ramzi's in New York. Everybody go vote. You can't give this to Cuomo. What are we doing? This is a few days early.
You got to vote. You got to vote if you're in New York. I mean, you got to vote if you're anywhere. But
if you're anywhere, there are so many critical races. Thank you so much, Ramzi. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Anything you want to tell the people, how they can follow you, support Clear's work, plug away.
Yeah, check out www.cunyclear.org, CUNYCLEAR.org, and you'll find all our social media handles there, and you'll learn about our work.
Thank you. Take care. And thank you all for being here. Appreciate you. We had to do this episode because it had been a long time coming, and just being someone who comes from an activist background and hearing a lot of whispers of people who are, working in nonprofits and foundations, or, doing movement work, who are on, this target list, is really, really terrifying. And these are, people who train in nonviolent civil disobedience, to people who do, campaign training, and on and on and on. So, these are the people that we need. These are the organizations, like CUNY Clear, that we have to be supporting. So definitely go support Ramzi's work. I mean, these are the heroes that are behind, again, the fact that Mahmoud Khalil is with his child today and not being detained. So, we got to keep on supporting them. And I want to thank you all for your support of this show. No fart song today. You're off the hook. Go vote. Polls are open late. And I will see you. I think we're going to do a show on Thursday with Maurice Mitchell of Working Families Party. I hope that still happens. And I'll see you Thursday. And I love y'all, and take care. And thank you to Paige Omick, and to Brent Godin, and to Andrea Fasoyan. And if you haven't already seen my episode on Greta Thunberg and climate disaster as it relates to military invasions, take a look at that. It's called Has Greta Changed? I'll see you on Thursday. Bye.